Welcome to So Money, everybody. I'm Farnoosh Torabi. It's Ask Farnoosh Friday time, and we're answering a really good question today about what to do when, after 20 years of working and changing jobs, you look up and realize you got a lot of retirement accounts all over the place. A 401k here, a 403b over there, maybe even have a rollover IRA, maybe another account you vaguely remember opening during the Clinton administration. Do you consolidate all of this? Is there a benefit to having your money spread across Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, wherever? Or does it just make your financial life unnecessarily complicated? And this question really has an underlying fear to it, I sense, from the listener, which is, what if I consolidate everything with one financial institution and something happens to that institution? They go under, there's a Bernie Madoff event. We also have a follow-up question about the Trump accounts. Last week, and for many weeks now, we've been talking about these new Trump accounts. And you may or may not know that Robinhood, the trading and investing platform, is serving as the brokerage and sole initial trustee for these government-backed accounts. And one listener writes in, why? Why Robinhood? Why can't parents just open the account at another institution? Was this simply a logistical decision to get the program off the ground, or did Robinhood somehow buy its way into becoming the exclusive provider? I had to look this up. It's a very good question. I did some digging, and I think the skepticism is fair. But there is a more nuanced answer to all of this, somewhere between nothing to worry about to this is totally fishy. It's something in the middle. Also, we're going to unpack some headlines. The buy now, pay later market is growing, and the tool is no longer just there for the sweater or the TV you want to buy. It's increasingly becoming used for necessities, including groceries, rent, utilities, basic bills. So we're going to talk about what this tells us about the financial health of our American households in this moment. And shopping scams are getting harder to detect. I was joking with my brother the other day that he sent me a video. It's like, my mother asking me if this is AI or if it's real. And you look at the video and it's a dog on a bicycle, like pedaling his way down the highway. And I don't know, we all need to get more educated on what is AI and what is not AI, but I fear most for the older generation who didn't grow up with technology or the World Wide Web, and they're still trying to figure out how to get their printer to work. Now they have to figure out and distinguish between AI and not AI, and the scammers are taking advantage of that. And so traditional advice of check for misspellings, look for awkward language. Does the website seem kind of sketchy? You can't really rely on that anymore. AI is getting more intelligent, and as a result, it's leading to a lot more scams. But first, let's start with a question that's been on my mind recently, and it's this. Are we in a housing bubble? If you tuned in last week, you heard me talk about the new Realtor.com ranking that named Montclair, New Jersey, the second hottest housing market in the country behind Peabody, Massachusetts. And of course, I live here in Montclair. So naturally, whenever someone tells me something I own is suddenly hot, my next thought is, great, but how long until it's not? And that's just where my brain goes. Because, we've lived through enough. We've lived through several economic cycles to know that markets don't move in one direction forever. And housing has been on an extraordinary run. Prices surged during the pandemic. Mortgage rates later doubled. Affordability became brutal. And yet, in a lot of desirable communities, prices remained stubbornly high because there just isn't enough inventory. So this week for my local show, the Montclair Pod, we interviewed Dr. Joshua Harris. He's an academic director of the Fordham Real Estate Institute and a real estate economist and an investment strategist. And the conversation was ostensibly about Montclair, but it kept zooming out into this bigger question of what is actually happening right now in American housing, and what would it take for prices to meaningfully fall? Because a lot of us have so much of our wealth tied up in our homes. Of course, this depends on where you live, but take a listen to what he had to say about the bigger picture.
I was very young, but I remember very painfully even watching the 2008 bubble. You had massive oversupply. Right. You had all kinds of, and also you had mortgages that were just being
Right.
were a joke. There's nothing like that. Now, I should say there are parts of the country that I do think, I don't know, the bubbles, nobody knows what a bubble is even. It's a weird phrase. I think that there are going to be markets, some of them in Florida, Texas, some of the really, really hot markets. They are seeing price declines. Now, they're seeing price declines that are maybe 2 to 3%. Maybe there's an extreme outlier of like an 8% market that maybe was very impacted by a hurricane or had may have some job, something unique. That's not unusual, but there's really not enough supply. I mean, we are pre '08. For everybody who was thinking, could '08 happen again? Should I wait to buy a house because I'm afraid of '08? We had literally massive oversupply. Here's an interesting, a really easy statistic to just drive this home. When we were in the height of the building boom that occurred from like 2005 through 2007, we were adding as many as 2.5 million housing units. That includes apartments and houses, condos, everything across the country. Well, the steady rate of new demand is only for about 1.1 million units. So we were literally at the worst part of it, overbuilding by almost 2.5 housing units given any rate of steady demand, right? Just there's live bodies that need to go live in a place. We were going to call it second home world, right? The realtors had all kinds of great ways to try to justify it. They were all wrong. And we had massive oversupply. And look, obviously then New York gets hit by certainly the downfall with the Wall Street calamities of '08 and all those companies that fail. So it impacts the New York market directly because a lot of people are getting laid off. Today, we barely, through all this period, we go down as low as 200,000 units in like the 2010 period. We don't even get back to over 1 million units per year of net new production until like about 2018, if I remember correctly. Oh, and by the way, we are actually deleting units, right? There's things, there are build homes that fall apart. Yeah. There are buildings that had to be torn down. So this undersupply thing that people talk about is quite real. I'm actually finishing up a book a little bit on a relation to this subject. I'll let you know when it's ready so I can come back on. But first of all, let me just promise you this. There will be another recession. There will be another stock market crash. I just can't tell you when, right? It'll be driven by probably what we call a black swan event, right? It'll surprise you. Could it be an AI, it turns out this stuff was all hokum and we're shutting them down or we've oversupplied. Who knows, right? Like could it be a geopolitical storm and one of these wars gets out of control? Like, I don't know, right? But it will surprise you, just like 9/11 surprised us, just the way kind of like the global financial crisis surprised us. That's the definition of a black swan. Will one happen? Yes. What will it be like? Obviously, COVID-19 kind of fits into that bucket. What it will be, I don't know. When it'll be, I have no idea. That's the whole nature of it. When that happens, I can definitely tell you that your housing market is going to cool. And you're right. A lot of people are sitting on a substantial portion of their net worth in home equity. And here's the problem with home equity, right? Is it's really costly and hard to access. It's difficult to even get home equity loans anymore. I mean, we've actually tightened up some of the problems of '08, and we don't have that. So, to some extent, real estate is more insulated today for the next one because it was on fire in the last one. So the regulatory structures, just market discipline is better. When that happens, though, absolutely. If the stock market were to take a big hit, absolutely, it'll slow the market. That doesn't mean that prices have to necessarily crash. I think that there's a little bit of a misnomer, or I don't know, I almost call this like internet Twitter lore that, well, because there was an '08 downturn that just like housing downturns just happen. The truth is, over the long history of real estate and housing in particular, there's been very few even close to what might look like severe downturns. I mean, you could pick markets like maybe Detroit where all the factories close, right? And then it depopulates. There's no jobs. That's obviously going to happen. So if you tell me that New York is going to lose 50% of its jobs, yes, your home is going to be worth substantially less. But I gotta be honest with you, that's such an extreme probability that even it's like, as I say,
we have bigger problems than our home equities at that point.
Exactly.
Like,
correct.
as I say, if there is an apocalypse, the last thing I'm worried about is my home value. Like I'm packing my bags. I'm running. You know what I mean? The zombies are here.
Thanks again to Josh Harris. He's with Fordham University. So, okay, another recession, of course, is happening, and no one can guess the time, but we note that they're part of economic cycles. Anyone giving you a precise countdown clock should probably also be selling lottery tickets. And if we do have a recession, the question then is, what is the impact? How big is it? We had one, if you remember, during COVID-19 in 2020, we had a mini recession and we quickly recovered from that. A lot of people, it was a blip on the radar for them. Well, will the next one be a blip or a blop, right? Housing, the next time around, will probably feel it because in a typical recession, people lose their jobs, consumer confidence falls, and buyers pull back. But this time, compared to the last great housing crash in 2008, the lending standards are different. Some would argue they have tightened. And some sellers, 2008, it's a housing crash that will live in our minds forever. When people hear housing downturn, they immediately go to that time frame and they imagine foreclosure signs on all the blocks, home prices falling off a cliff. But like I said, today's market has some very different fundamentals. So here's one piece of data. The Mortgage Bankers Association finds that the national mortgage delinquency rate at the end of the second quarter this year was 4.4%. That is higher than a year ago, so there are absolutely households feeling more stress, but we are nowhere close to that sort of systemic mortgage failure that we saw during the financial crisis. Meanwhile, American homeowners collectively have an enormous amount of equity. Mortgage holders now have a record $18 trillion in home equity. That's about $212,000 per borrower. That's interesting, right? And just a sidebar here, home equity loans, although that market has also diminished in the past 10 years, it's still something that's available to a lot of consumers, a lot of homeowners. And if you're looking to borrow right now, I'm not saying do this, but comparatively, home equity loans, home equity lines of credit carry smaller interest rates than credit cards. So if you're going to do a big project around your house, a lot of people look to home equity, lines of credit, or loans as a way to solve for that financially, as opposed to using credit cards because the carrying costs are much, much lower. Anyway, back to the story. Enormous difference between today's housing market and the mid-2000s. Now, it's not all rosy. There are about 813,000 borrowers who are underwater, meaning they owe more than their home is currently worth. And that is up. That is up 44% from a year ago. Those borrowers are disproportionately people who bought more recently, however, particularly in markets where prices have been falling. And inventory is coming back. We're starting to see some of that market open up. Realtor.com reported that active listings nationally have been above 1.1 million homes for several consecutive weeks, which is a level of supply that we just haven't seen or sustained since before the pandemic. So that's healthy. Buyers need choices. So taking all of that into consideration, I think the headline, it's not that housing is about to crash or housing can never go down, is that housing is becoming a much more local market. We can't really talk about housing nationally to paint a fair picture. We have to go local, sometimes hyper local. I mean, thinking about even Montclair, which is the second hottest housing market in the country, it's not the case at every block, right? There are certain neighborhoods that are more desirable or less desirable depending on their proximity to the train station, their walkability, the crime rate. One town might still get 12 offers on a house. 20 miles away, sellers may be cutting their prices. So that's what's happening with the housing market. And that was my question of the week. Now, moving on to this week's episodes, in case you missed them, Wednesday, we talked about financial wellness from the source of financial wellness, the person who dubbed the term Liz Davidson, founder of Financial Finesse. 30 years ago, almost, before financial wellness was a standard line item in corporate benefits packages or that we were talking about it on this podcast, Liz was raising money for a hedge fund during the dot-com boom, and she had a light bulb moment. So she's sitting across from entrepreneurs and wealthy, sophisticated investors. She's watching people take enormous financial risks with money they had worked extremely hard to build, thinking, well, they might lose some of this. But you know what? They were going to be okay. But then she realizes if these wealthy, financial, sophisticated people can be exposed, what about everybody else? What about the assistant down the hall who has stock options but no emergency fund? What about the person making a good salary who's secretly drowning in credit card debt? What is going to happen to these people? So Liz went and built the thing that didn't quite exist at the time, and she built Financial Finesse, which is widely credited with pioneering the workplace financial wellness industry as we know it today. And it was a great conversation about how far we've come and also how far we have to go. Where is this conversation going to take us in the next 5-10 years? Then Monday, we had a very candid conversation about early retirement. And I know that it sounds very fabulous. I sometimes dream of it. No alarm, no having to respond to client emails. But what happens after the initial honeymoon? My guest, Bernadette Joy, founder of Crush Your Money Goals, she retired at 41 not too long ago. And what surprised her was that leaving work, it solved one problem, but introduced another question. What am I doing with my life? And so we talked about the emotional side of financial independence, how you redefine success once you're no longer chasing a career ladder. So go back and listen to that episode, and would be interested to hear what you think. And reminder, we're also on YouTube, where you can watch the show. If you like getting your podcast on YouTube, which word on the street is, that's where everything's headed. It's all video all the time. Check us out. Please subscribe. It helps tremendously. All right, let's get into some headlines of late. As I promised, those buy now, pay later plans, they're expanding. There was a fascinating and kind of troubling story in the New York Times this week about them. So let's recap what they are. BNPL plans. It's like, you want to buy a pair of shoes, they cost hundreds of dollars. You don't want to spend the hundreds of dollars today. So rather than taking your credit card or overdrafting on your debit card, you split it into 4 payments. And that was basically the proposition initially with BNPL. Like anywhere you check out online now, this is an option, most likely. You can use your credit card, you can use Apple Pay, all the things, or you can use a BNPL plan. There are many companies that provide them. What we're finding now is that this plan, this financial option is moving beyond discretionary shopping. Americans are now using it for the basics: rent, utilities, insurance, medical bills, phone bills, even their taxes. The Times reports that companies including Flex and Zip now enable consumers to finance certain household bills. Affirm, another player in this market, has also offered some renters short-term financing that essentially gives them additional time to make their rent payment. And the market has gotten very big. The Times reports that Americans spent roughly $160 billion through buy now, pay later loans last year, nearly twice the level of 2023. So in just 2 years, this market has exploded. I think the more revealing statistics are the ones telling us why people are using these products. So I found a new Lending Tree survey that 54% of BNPL users say they need these loans to make ends meet. And among parents with children under 18, this number is rising to 62%. And that to me is the story. We are increasingly financing the cost of simply being alive. And by the way, grocery use is rising fast. Lending Tree found that 29% of BNPL users have now used these loans to buy food. 2 years ago, it was just 14%. So we're not talking about a handbag or a sweater or a TV anymore. We're talking about milk, eggs. I don't think buy now, pay later plans are inherently evil. There are legitimate reasons why someone today chooses one of these loans over another form of borrowing, right? Maybe it's because they like the repayment period being very short. There's no interest attached to these BNPL plans. The fees in some cases may seem clearer than what you'd pay carrying a balance on a credit card. And let's be honest, where credit card rates are, if the alternative is revolving a balance at 20-something%, an interest-free installment can look very attractive. And let's say your rent is due on the 1st and your paycheck hits on the 5th and you're borrowing money for 4 days. I get it why somebody would look at this and say, this solves my problem. But here's where I think we need to make a really important distinction. Are you solving a timing problem or are you solving an affordability problem? Because they're not the same problem. If you have $2,000 coming on Friday and you need $1,500 today, that's cash flow timing. But if you need $1,500 today and you have $900 coming on Friday, that's affordability. That's a deficit issue. And there's not really a financial product that can permanently solve that second crisis. It can disguise it. It can rearrange the calendar, but it cannot make the math. So that's why I get concerned when these tools just become a regular part of a household's operating budget. If you're financing your electricity this month because you don't have enough money to pay for electricity, then next month, you don't have just another electricity bill. You have next month's electricity bill plus this month's installment, and it's going to snowball. Lending Tree found that 1 in 4 buy now, pay later users had 3 or more loans active at the same time. It also found 47% of those users made a late payment on the plan within the past year, and that's up also from 2 years ago. So there's a trend. And because one of the behavioral tricks of buy now, pay later is that it makes the purchase price psychologically smaller. You stop thinking, oh my gosh, this is $400. You think it's 4 payments of $100, or it's only $32 today. And a majority of users say that these loans cause them to overspend. More than half have regretted a purchase using a BNPL plan. So this isn't me scolding people. I'm just pointing out that the product works partly because it changes how we perceive cost, just like with credit cards. And there's another issue here that I think deserves a lot of attention, which is that sometimes this is called phantom debt. The BNPL loans historically have not appeared in the traditional credit reporting ecosystem. And this is a big problem for me. If you're going to borrow money, which is essentially what you're doing with BNPL, and you're doing the good job of paying it back on time, that you should be rewarded for this. This should go on your report card, your credit report card, right? But BNPLs don't all have the same visibility. So it makes it harder for lenders to see the consumer's complete financial obligations. And, I'm going to be optimistic here and say that you're doing well with these plans. That should work in your favor. So not shaming people for using these products. In many cases, I get it. There are systemic issues with our financial system, our wages, all of the things where it makes a plan like this fit a need for the short term. But if someone is needing to use and rely on BNPLs to pay for groceries before payday, for rent, I'm worried about this trend. So if you use BNPL, I just want you to ask yourself a question. Am I borrowing because the money is coming, or am I borrowing because the money just isn't there for the foreseeable future? All right, next story, very important. We're going to talk about AI shopping scams. They're getting a lot harder to detect. And the reason is AI. According to a new survey by Signified, they did some fraud research. Overall, e-commerce fraud pressure rose 33% year over year in the first 4 months of this year. One particular category, account takeover attacks, jumped 78%. So card testing attacks where fraudsters use stolen payment information to see which cards still work rose 175%. And so here's what we need to know. We've always talked about the red flags to catching scams, things like typos, bad grammar, look at the logo. Does it seem slightly off? If you get an email, check actually the email, not what the email name is. Like if you get an email from me, it's going to say Farnoosh. But if you click on Farnoosh, it'll show you the actual email. And unless it says Farnoosh at SoManyPodcasts.com, it's probably not me. Maybe it says Farnoosh at SoManyPodcasts.com and the O is a 0 instead of the letter O. Okay. So we've always said to just do your due diligence as to the extent that you can. But AI has taken a lot of those tells away. A scammer no longer needs to be a good writer, right? They don't need a graphic designer. They don't need to understand how Amazon or your bank writes an email. All that content is out there, and they can use large language models like ChatGPT, Claude to generate polished copy. It can mimic tone. It can even create fake product descriptions, convincing images. So the question that we've always been asking, does this look legit, is becoming far less useful. And one vulnerability that Money Magazine highlighted recently in an article is that all of those old retail accounts you've accumulated and forgotten about, the one where you ordered a swimsuit once in 2021, the random home goods website where you ordered a lamp during COVID or a desk during COVID or tried to because there were no more desks around, your account may still exist. That maybe the password you've used there is one that you use everywhere else or somewhere else. Maybe your credit card is still saved. So Money reported that stolen retail accounts can sell on underground marketplaces for just a few bucks. Think about that. The economics of that. That's quite a return for a scammer. If a criminal can buy access to an account for $3 and then they discover $200 worth of loyalty points inside it, that's a pretty good return, right? And so this is why loyalty programs are increasingly attractive targets. We think of points as fake money. Fraudsters understand that points can often become real merchandise. So we're seeing AI enter the world of return fraud. A scammer may be able to generate a fake image showing damaged merchandise, manipulate a receipt, and then make a claim. And the numbers around return fraud are huge. $850 billion worth of merchandise returns last year, and $76.5 billion are estimated to be fraudulent. So 9% of returns fraudulent. And we all pay for that because maybe it's the retailer who turns around and tightens its return window. Maybe you have to jump through like 12 verification steps to return a pair of jeans. I'll tell you, I went to the Gap to return a pair of jeans this summer. They came in the mail. They didn't fit. The tags were still on. I tried them on, obviously. Never wore them out of the house. Never wore them for more than 10 seconds. And then I go to return them, and the sales associate is very skeptical. She's like, these look creased. These look worn. I'm like, well, it's the style of the jean. Like, there's a little bit of a distressed look. I swear to you, like, I didn't wear these. And if you look at my profile, I am a regular customer here. And I think my return rate is like 0.5%. But it was like a moment. And I felt sized up and down. Whatever. It's no cost for me, really, other than just feeling like a little bit of a loser for a minute at the Gap checkout. So what do? I think the takeaway is that we can no longer rely exclusively on just our eyes. A scam may not look like a scam anymore. So go through old shopping accounts, close the ones you genuinely don't use, stop recycling the same password across 10 websites, use a password manager. This is so important. Multi-factor authentication. Wherever it's available, you've got to do this. And if you get a text saying, hey, today only, save 75% off everything, don't click it because a logo looks convincing. Close the text, open the retailer's actual app, or type the company's address into your browser with a safe Wi-Fi connection yourself, and you will find it there. And if you don't find it there, then you have your answer. All right, let's get to the mailbag. This one comes from Anne on Instagram, and she writes, hey, Farnoosh, I've learned a significant amount from your show over the last few years. Thanks, Anne. I've learned a lot over the last few years, too, doing this show. That's what keeps me going, is that I can stay abreast of things. The show is very helpful to me as well, but I'm so appreciative of your loyalty and sticking with us. I hope you're watching us now on YouTube. She says, my question is regarding multiple retirement accounts. I moved around quite a bit for the first 20 years of my nursing career. I'm now settled in one place in my 40s and focusing more attention on my retirement accounts. I have multiple of them through different employers with at least 2 different financial service companies. The types include 401ks, 401as, 403bs, and a rollover IRA. So would it be beneficial to consolidate all of these accounts into 1 or 2? If not, is it better to have them split between 2 different financial service providers? And she says also, I don't know what it is, but maybe I've watched too many Bernie Madoff documentaries, which I have too. But I am slightly paranoid about leaving all of my retirement money in one place. So I would appreciate any insights you might have. All right. So, Anne, this is a very normal situation. I think most people would say they have more than one retirement account because it's the nature of work and also the nature of how the retirement accounts we have access to. They are tied to our employers in many cases. So you switch a job even once during your career, you're going to have more than one retirement account, or at least at one point you did and did something with it. Now, I'm generally a fan of consolidation when it makes your life easier without causing you to give up something valuable. So the first question isn't necessarily, how do I get everything into one account? I think the first question is, how do I make this less complicated for me? Because you've got 401ks and all these other accounts, even a rollover IRA, you probably can't magically turn every dollar into an identical type of account, but you might be able to dramatically simplify the number of accounts that you're managing. As an example, some of those former employer accounts may be eligible to roll into your current employer's retirement plan, assuming that the plan accepts incoming rollovers. Another possibility is rolling certain accounts into your existing rollover IRA. Here's where I would just slow us down. Don't consolidate just for the satisfaction of having fewer logins. Before you do anything, before you move any money, do an audit and ask yourself, what are the fees on all of the various accounts? What are my investments? Do I have access to low-cost institutional funds in one employer account, that I wouldn't necessarily be able to buy elsewhere? Are there any valuable guarantees or plan-specific features? And how easy is the plan to manage? If your current employer's retirement plan, you like it, it's got low fees, good investment choices, an easy UX interface, it could potentially become the hub for all these other accounts that you have dangling. Maybe several of those old accounts roll into your current plan. Now, I want to talk about the part of your question that I think is totally normal too, which is the fear aspect of this. You mentioned Bernie Madoff. We also know that sometimes banks can go under because of their own poor mismanagement. And it's a psychological reaction, but it's rooted in a lot of truth, right? So if you log into one website and see $1 million sitting under one corporate logo, you might be like, okay, too many eggs in this basket. But here's the distinction I want everyone to understand. Diversifying your investments is not the same thing as diversifying your custodians. So let's say you have $500,000 at Fidelity. It doesn't necessarily mean you have $500,000 invested in Fidelity. You have, a Vanguard ETF, you have a BlackRock ETF, you have treasury bonds, you have an S&P 500 index fund, bonds, cash. Those securities are the assets, and Fidelity is the institution holding or servicing the account, and reputable regulated brokerages and retirement plan custodians are not supposed to take your securities and mix them in with the company's operating cash and use your retirement savings to pay the bills. Customer assets are generally held separately for customers. So if a brokerage fails, I wouldn't be concerned that your investments will disappear because the company went bankrupt. Typically, those customer assets can be transferred to another firm. And let's not forget, in brokerage accounts, there is SIPC protection. It's kind of like FDIC protection. It protects customers when securities or cash go missing from a failed brokerage, generally up to $500,000 per customer, including up to $250K for cash. It's different from FDIC insurance. It does not protect you against an investment losing value in the market, but it will in the event that the institution fails. Employer retirement plans also have their own structures and legal protections. So this isn't exactly the same framework for every account, but the larger point is that a custodian going out of business is not the same thing as your investments going to zero. And that's fundamentally different from the Bernie Madoff situation because his fraud involves falsified statements and investment activity that in many cases simply was not happening as represented. So you thought there were these securities. The securities actually weren't even there. So that's very different than like your S&P 500. Your legit S&P 500 fund is held at a major regulated brokerage, and then that brokerage encounters financial trouble. It's not like your money's going to disappear, again, up to that SIPC limit. So if the only reason you want to keep this money separated is because of fear of what we just talked about, like I always say, when you have fear, let's learn a little bit more about what actually happens, what's going on. The fear can be laid down to rest once we have more information. I don't think the fear is legit. I don't think that you have to be afraid. You may decide, though, that you prefer some consolidation, maybe not 6, you want to go to 2. That's reasonable. There's no reward for consolidating your entire financial life into one financial house. All right, last question, the Trump accounts and Robinhood. This is from Steph on Instagram, and it's a follow-up to our ongoing conversation about Trump accounts. She writes, one question that arose for the Trump accounts is they can only be opened by the Treasury with Robinhood as the broker, rather than allowing other brokerages like Vanguard, Fidelity, etc. to host them. Is this a pilot or setup limitation, or does that feel fishy to you, Farnoosh? Like Robinhood bought the ability to host the Trump accounts? All right, this is a fair question, and I did go digging, and here's what I learned. Robinhood is the sole initial broker and trustee. Initial. It's not supposed to be the only place Trump accounts can ever live. So the Treasury initially selected Bank of New York Mellon, BNY, as the government's financial agent for the program. Then BNY partnered with Robinhood, which is serving as the brokerage and the initial trustee. So Robinhood is supplying much of the technology, the customer support, and the infrastructure behind the Trump account experience. The Treasury describes the app as a custom white label Treasury product, meaning that you're not opening an account on Robinhood the Treasury retains control over the app and the operations for these initial accounts. And so that's the first distinction. The other distinction is you're not stuck at Robinhood forever if you just don't like them. The Trump account rules allow the full balance to eventually move via a trustee-to-trustee transfer into another eligible Trump account provider. So I looked into this, and Vanguard actually has publicly said that it plans to support Trump account rollovers once the necessary guidance is available from the Treasury. Vanguard has also been selected as one of the fund providers available inside the Treasury program. And Fidelity has similarly told investment professionals that it is exploring the requirements for offering rollover Trump accounts, while noting that the industry is still, again, waiting for guidance. So this isn't like Robinhood gets your kids' money for 18 years, end of story. It's more like the Treasury has established the account through one centralized initial system, and eventually families should legally have the ability to transfer the account to another qualified provider. Now, you might be wondering why Robinhood, and I think this is where Steph's skepticism is very reasonable because they don't have a great track record legally. There was competition. Semaphore, the news platform, reported in April that BNY and Robinhood beat out a number of competing firms for this initial launch. The Treasury also confirmed that other financial institutions would initially participate primarily through rollovers. So no evidence that Robinhood just wrote a check to the administration and purchased exclusive rights to the Trump accounts. But here's where I think the legit question remains. Why did Robinhood win? Because the public explanation isn't that detailed. And that matters when you consider Robinhood's regulatory history, right? Back last year, January of 2025, Robinhood's two broker-dealers agreed to pay $45 million in combined civil penalties to the SEC over more than 10 different securities law provisions, including issues involving suspicious activity reporting, identity theft protections, record keeping, and customer data. So does it mean that Robinhood's unsafe? I don't think so. Does it prove that the Treasury did something improper? No. But it does make this question a reasonable one. If the government is choosing one company to become the initial brokerage interface for potentially tens of millions of kids' investment accounts, I think we're allowed to say, show us your work, right? What were the criteria? Who else bid? How are those bidders secured? Transparency is how you reduce suspicion. It's how you gain trust. And this arrangement, by the way, is enormously valuable to Robinhood, even though as the custodian of my kids' Trump accounts, we're not paying Robinhood trading commissions inside these accounts. But the CEO of Robinhood, Vlad Tenev, said on the company's earnings call that developing the Trump accounts app puts Robinhood technology in front of potentially all those investors, which is a huge win for Robinhood. That is customer acquisition on a scale that companies only dream of. So no evidence that Robinhood bought the right to host Trump accounts. I think, it was a centralized launch. The Treasury selected BNY as its financial agent. Then BNY partnered with Robinhood as the brokerage and initial trustee. But families can expect eventually to have the ability to transfer their assets in the Trump accounts to another eligible provider. All right, great questions as always. Keep them coming. You can DM me on Instagram at Farnoosh Tarabi. Drop a question below. Email me, farnoosh@somanypodcast.com. And if you like what you're seeing here on YouTube, if you're consuming this on YouTube, hit that follow and subscribe button. And that way you'll get the latest episodes before anybody else. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I hope your weekend is so money.